You're watching BCTV. We're all about Brantford. You're watching BCTV, Brantford Government Television, a service of Brantford Community Television. This program is brought to you in part through the support of the town of Brantford.
Oh, I like yours.
Okay. Put a badge on it.
All right, we're going to get started for the Town of Brantford Board of Finance budgetary public hearings for the fiscal year 2019-2020. And before we start tonight's continuation of the public hearings, I was just going to provide a short overview of the budget requests. We have budget requests before us of $116,643,112, representing a 4.1% increase in expenditures. We have an estimated revenue stream of $13,805,000, leaving net to be raised from taxation of $102,837,000, representing approximately 3.5% increase in taxation, which would equate to a mill rate of approximately 29.52. As I pointed out in the past, that these budget process will be finalized. The public hearings will be finalized tonight. The board will meet on Monday to recommend a budget to the RTM. They will go through their committee hearings and meet as a whole in early May and approve a budget. We will come back in May and set the mill rate and finalize the revenues. At this point, the total Board of Ed, the municipal side, including capital requests, are 5% increase. The Board of Ed is requesting a 2.1% increase in their operational budget, which also includes contributions to the teachers' retirement, if so passed by the legislature. So tonight we'll begin with East Shore Health District presentation on page 43. Welcome, Michael.
Good evening. Good evening.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think you're fine. Actually, if you move that aside, there's a little fob right in front of you yeah, that's it there. Yeah,
Okay.
you're fine.
First and foremost, I apologize for missing Tuesday. While I had surgery planned, it was supposed to be in and out, and it ended up going into general anesthesia, and they had to do a bit more work than expected.
All right, well, thank you for that, and hopefully you'll find.
So I guess we have a few things to talk about tonight. So we started out with the budget, but I also would like to talk a little bit about the recent article that was in the New Haven Register also.
Sure, why don't you hit on the budget, and then we can get into that other issue.
So the East Shore District Health Department's budget is a relatively simple budget. It's based on per capita. So we look at the population, and population is always 2 years in arrear, so it's based on 2017 census data, and there was an increase in the population by 83 persons here in Brantford, which makes it 28,111. Our per capita rate was set at $8.59, which brings our request to $241,473. Also within the line items, there's a mosquito control budget that we put in. That contract's managed by the health district, but it's paid by Branford. We only sign off on the invoices. And then there's a $3,000 fee for the pump-out boat program. The state of Connecticut, while they recently helped support the new solar electric pump-out boat on the operations side, they cut the budget, and so there's a significant reduction in the operating side. So what we're asking is all the towns that participate in the pump-out boat program, if they can contribute $3,000 to the operation of the service. For a while, we've been able to operate it based on in-kind services only. The program is 75% paid by Connecticut Deep, the rest are all local match. Branford has done the lion's share of the pump-out boat program. I have to acknowledge that. And while it's a regional program, we're asking all the towns that participate to help out with this fee. And we've already had conversations with Deep, and if a municipality does not support it, then they're not going to get the pump-out boat program. So that's something that we're having conversations with other municipalities. So if we look at the net result of the budget from last year to this year, it's about $9,121 increase.
Okay, Michael. Questions from Michael on this budget? Charlie?
The narrative says that the new governor has reduced the funding. Is that the amount that he's reduced it by?
Which line item?
Well, I'm looking at your note that you have on page 43-1.
Yeah, so there's a series of cuts that are happening to local public health, and there's also some increases in some of our costs. So our per capita grant, there's a proposal to cut it by 20%. The pump-out boat program was cut, our block grant was cut. We did receive a little extra money for our opioid program. The state's putting some resources into that program. And on the operating side, our pension plan, we're in the MRF plan.
The MRF plan?
The MRF plan. So there's some significant costs for this coming year and also in future years. And it's, just the cost of doing business with the MRF plan. If you participate in it, you have to contribute. It's going up to 14+%. I'm sorry, from about 12% to a little over 14%. And then in about 4 years, it goes up to about 22%. Although it's probably overdue, it hasn't really been funded, and all municipalities who participate in this plan will be feeling the increase in that. And one of the things that we're doing to try to control our costs, our health care, is pretty significant. Right now, we're in Blue Cross Blue Shield. We're looking at going to the state plan. The United Healthcare Oxford plan, and that would be able to offset some of the costs. Since I gave my budget to Jim Finch, there was actually another cut we just found out about. Our emergency preparedness grant is being cut by about $20,000, which is somewhere around 40% to that grant. So our budget is really tough right now because it's a moving target. But working with the board of directors, every time there's a cut, we just usually absorb it. It's just the cost of doing business as a regional or local health department. And the increase that we have asked for, we do not plan to come to the towns and ask for additional funding. In fact, whenever we've said it, we've never gone to our towns and asked for additional funding.
So Mike, do you have a fund balance?
Yes, we do.
What's the amount of the fund balance right now?
So the purpose of the fund balance?
Or the amount in the fund balance?
The amount of the fund balance, let's pull it out. So it's based on a 2018 audit. At that time, it was $630,810. As of last week, it was just under $450,000. Our revenue streams come in from several sources, and it's not on any set timeline. And so what happens is we use that to basically balance our budget. Some of the grants we receive, we also, the state requires us to subcontract with some of our adjacent towns. And so some of it's pass-through money. And so that's kind of how our budget balance works. It goes up and down. I mean, it's dipped as low as $300,000.
Okay. Charlie?
Michael, is there any limitation on the use of the fund balance? Like things you can use it for and things you cannot use it for?
Yes, so within our grants, you'll see they're coded. We work with our auditor on this. Some of our restricted use funds, some are assigned use funds, and then there's other money that is more general funding. In the general funding, it's open-ended, so we can use it for non-assigned accounts. So it's a mixed bag depending on where the funding comes from. Because there are also the money that we get from some of our funders. We have to, produce reports, expenditure reports, and every year our auditor goes through the different categories to make sure it's spent appropriately.
Okay, other questions?
Thank you.
Bob?
Michael, on the pump out service, where's that material, what treatment plant is that being delivered to?
So it's the Brantford wastewater treatment plant, but we also have a pump out in New Haven at Long Wharf.
Okay.
So there's 2 stations.
And you pay no fee for that?
No, there's no fee. That's one of the in-kind services
Okay.
that the 2 treatment plants give us.
And what's the gallonage? You have any idea?
It ranges somewhere between 23 and 26,000 gallons a year, season.
So that's 3 months, 4 months?
The boating season's been extended a little bit more. It's more like 5 months. Lately with the warm weather, we're going a bit more into October.
Thank you.
Well,
Other questions from the board on this budget? Questions from, pardon? Or Jamie? Yes.
Just for clarification, with your note regarding the governor's proposed budget, which the health department will see a reduction from state funds to the department. Your budget as presented accounts for that full amount of the governor's proposed reduction,
yes.
except for the $20,000 for the emergency preparedness. That was not reflected in this budget.
Yeah, so that is a cut that the district will absorb. We've already presented our towns our budget as a proposal, and so somewhere within our budget we'll have to absorb it. As I said when we met, it's a moving target.
Yes. So
I
you're
don't
going in with the work, what we see right now is potentially the governor's for the health department. You see this as worst-case scenario. And things as it goes through the legislature and the final budget is adopted, there'll be potential changes to that.
There could be potential changes, yes.
But the district, you said, is prepared to make adjustments to reflect those.
Yeah, we're prepared to make adjustments.
Or may not have to. The balancer is your fund balance.
Our fund balance, correct, yep. That's kind of how we absorb some of the cuts, and if they get too significant, then we look at other ways of cutting, similar to the town. And we have a plan, and we try to stick to the plan, but sometimes throughout the year, we have to make other cuts.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Michael. Questions from RTM members, members of the public? Okay, I guess we're all set. Oh, you want to, I'm sorry, you want to also talk about the article?
I do feel compelled to talk about
Sure.
the recent article. I also, and I believe you got a copy, my first ever letter to the editor.
Okay,
I put a rebuttal in there, and so the state is going to the FTA code. We were notified in October 2017 that the older code, which is right here, it's about 20 pages, that we're going to go to a 700-plus page code. And the state sent a memo basically telling us to inform our businesses that, effective July 1st, 2018, that they need to understand this code and we're going to enforce it. And so we took a proactive approach. And instead of inspecting under the old code, that's about to expire, we decided to put on trainings. We also had to do some housekeeping with the district because we're going from a different code, different database, different application process. There were lots of things to do. And so on the surface, we didn't do some of the inspections. However, we put on lots of training for our businesses, and we've been proactively working with our businesses. And I think this is where we differ from the state. We are not a state agency, we're a local regional agency. And we felt obligated to help our businesses, not show up with our clipboards and say, here's the new code, and if you don't comply, we're going to write you up and send orders. And that just wasn't, it just didn't sit right for us. And so on the surface, yes, we didn't do some of those inspections, but we took a proactive approach to work with the businesses and help them. Especially some of our local businesses are struggling, and it just wouldn't be fair. And so I did explain it in the rebuttal as best as I could. And the other thing that didn't come out is this is another unfunded mandate. The state keeps giving us unfunded mandates. The FTA code is an unfunded mandate. While it's a good one, we're one of the last states to actually adopt it. It's still an unfunded mandate, and it comes at a time when they're cutting us 20% on our per capita along with some other cuts.
okay. Thank you for that, that explanation. Other questions from Michael with regards to that? Anybody from the audience or RTM members like to ask further questions from the East Shore Health District? All right, thank you. Yep. Frank? You have to pick up the mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Mike. Well, yeah, I just wanted to know, if the inspections are now back, on schedule.
Yes, we are doing our inspections. In fact, what the FDA code has been postponed several times. The last clarification that we got from the state is they're pushing it out now into January 1st, 2020.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
we just found that out.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, other questions? Thank you, Michael. Good luck.
Thank you.
Next is Willoughby Wallace Memorial Library.
I asked Jim if he could I couldn't figure out how to shut the blower off.
Oh. On page 51. Good evening.
Hi.
Total request is $245,937, increase of $5,651. Welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Well, some of the increases are salary increases. Some are in the supplies. we buy all of our own custodial supplies, and I wasn't quite sure, they haven't gone up too much in the last few years, but they might, so I did bump that up more, but the library's been very busy the past year. We're hosting a lot of other departments in our building, the rec department, a lot of organizations that would normally meet in the senior center or the rec department or Blackstone have been meeting at our library, so the library's much busier. You know, bathrooms are getting used more, all that, so I thought we might need more supplies for that, so I put that up. Another item that has gone up a little bit is automation. We pay for our own Comcast service, a monthly service, and I asked, it's provided through Lion, who supplies all of our automation service, if they thought it was going up this year, and they had no idea. But I wouldn't be surprised if it went up a little bit this year. So that's also under automation, that's gone up a little bit.
Right.
I think those are most of the increases are those. Supplies, automation, and a little bit of the salaries.
Okay. Questions from the board with regards to this budget? Charlie?
I just have one. Like, you know, every year there's a Lion program, I guess, like you can't be say a library unless you're in the Lion program, Lion, and it goes up. It seems like it goes up every year. And do we have any control or say in what goes on there?
Well, all of the library directors are board members of Lion, so we vote whenever we take on a new service. For instance, the delivery service was added on 2 years ago because the state service could no longer provide a delivery service that was functioning. So that was a Lion board member. There's about 30 libraries involved in Lion. There's other consortiums around the state, but we're a member of Lion, which is the 30 libraries in our area. And whenever there's an increase from the Lion, for Lion costs, it's because we voted to have these services for our patrons. The delivery service is one.
And the Lion is like a platform, right, where you have choices?
Lion is an organization, it's a consortium, and there's an administration in Middletown, and they provide all of our tech services and administration. And all of the library directors who are members are a member of the board of Lion. So we meet monthly.
Thanks.
So some of the cost increase, yes, like one was the delivery service cost, was a new cost.
Thank you.
Questions? Questions from RTM members or members of the public? Frank?
Hello, Senator. Hey, how are you? Yes, I just wanted to follow up on that last question, the Lion question. In the past years, I believe at Willoughby Wallace, all the computers were operated, I think, by the town's IT department, which made it a little cheaper. And there was some talk that maybe Lion, the pricing of it was going to go into a la carte services, so the library could pick from different things that they offered. You know, I mean, did that come to pass? Did that happen?
There is not an a la carte service right now.
It's just a flat rate.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions from the Willoughby Wallace Library budget? Okay, I think we're all set. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No capital items, correct?
No.
Okay, thank you. Next is James Blackstone Memorial Library. Page 50.
Good evening.
Welcome, Robin and Karen and board members.
Members of the Board of Finance, Selectman Cosgrove, Town Clerk Lisa Arpin, and the Finance Director. We're here to present I'm Robin Sandler, I'm President of the Board of Trustees, and we're here to present the 2019-2020 budget for the James Blackstone Library. And presenting that will be Karen, our Library Director, and our Assistant Treasurer, David Henderson.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you very much. So for next fiscal year, the overall increase in our budget request is a little over 3%. Most of the reason for this a little bit higher increase is that we're asking to have the maintenance line restored to the amount that we requested last year. If you remember, last year it was cut a little over $9,000, and we do expect to spend that amount this year, so we're asking for it next year. Otherwise, the most significant increases are in salaries, a 2.5% increase, and our materials budget has increased by $5,000 over last year. If you remember last year, we actually reduced the materials line by $15,000, anticipating that we wouldn't be renting out the auditorium during the renovation process. Since the renovation is due to be finished in December of 2019, we're hoping to schedule some events for spring, so for that revenue. Excuse me. Also, the medical insurance line is increased 6.5%, and that is reflecting an anticipated increase in cost of 10%, plus a reduction in coverage for one employee. That's it for the budget. I also have a capital request.
Why don't we just look at the budget for now,
Okay.
Karen? Questions from the board with regards to the operating budget?
I have one question on page 50.1.
50.1, Harry?
In the first paragraph, it seems to be a very active facility, but how do you account for the 491 visits per day? Is some form of automation, or is it
Yes.
some form of head count?
Yes, we have a people counter device. So it's a device that's at the entrance of the library, both entrances, front and back. So it clicks every time someone passes through. So it actually clicks when you enter and when you leave. So we take that number every day, divide it in half, and that's how we get the number.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Charlie?
Hi, Karen.
Hi, Charlie.
On that same page, 51, under the Friends of the Library,
Yes.
it says that gross receipts is 60,000.
Yes.
Is there a net figure that I don't see the 60, but is there a net
Right.
figure from that?
Right. They obviously do have expenses
Sure.
associated with the book sale. And the net figure ranges from $25,000 to $30,000
Okay, that's what I'll
each year.
see.
Pardon me?
That's what I'll see in the,
We do not add that to the budget request because we don't know exactly what to anticipate, and it's also balanced against expenses that they reimburse. So
okay. I thought I saw it in here.
you might have seen last year's
maybe.
actual.
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, that's what I saw. Okay. Thanks.
you're welcome.
Okay, so to your point, Charlie, that was included, and not in last year's budget, though, but it was included in the actual audit.
So that money funds programs, concerts, performances, materials for the collection. It funded our Maker Lab, so any equipment that we add to that or materials that we use, summer reading, nutmeg books, extra copies of books, things like that.
Okay,
Oh, and professional development.
gotcha. Other questions from the library? Questions from RTM members, members of the Board of Finance, members of the general public?
Mr. Mayor, I'll give you a quick update on the construction, if you'd like to
Sure.
take a minute or so. They're going to be pouring the slab for the addition, hopefully this Saturday, weather permitting. And then the steel will be in place first week in April and hopefully completed by the 11th. And then they'll put the masonry and the Tennessee stone in late May and until the middle of June. A lot of big work has been going on inside, and of course you can see some of it that's been going on outside through the fence. But somewhere around June, you'll actually see the finished outside product. The top floor, that's where our administration is moving up to, will be completed and turned over to us end of this week or into next week?
The rooms are supposed to be completed next week. We still have phone lines to be readied, and computers and computer furniture for the computer labs. That's also on the top floor. So that computer lab may be open in summer. Well, the project is going really well, on time and on budget. One of the items that we're not so sure about till we get further is the FF&E, so the furniture, fixtures, and equipment, which includes computers. So summertime for that
Things are
part.
moving along now. Nice.
So we're still on completion at the end of December 2019.
Great. Thank you for that. Do you want to you want to go over the capital requests?
Yes, so we're also asking for $7,500, a one-time cost to install 3 types of computer software. One is upgrading all of our public computers to Microsoft Office 2019. That cost is $29 per computer. We're also hoping to install Envisionware time and print management. Basically, that is just an interface that ensures that all of the prints will be paid for. They have to be released by a staff member. And time management just manages how long you stay on the computer. So the length of time is an hour, and it can be extended. And the third one is Deep Freeze System Restore. So that's a software that preserves all of the settings that we set the computer for. And a patron can go and do whatever they want on the computer. They can save documents, etc. But when they log off, the computer goes back to how we set it.
So these are one-time purchases?
Yes, they're one-time charges, one-time costs.
And these are done in conjunction with Town Hall IT for,
These would actually be installed by the Lion IT people, because we're not a town department. The town IT department doesn't work on our computers.
you're not part of our network or domain or anything like that?
Correct.
Okay.
But I think I think they are good prices, and to your question earlier of Alice, for the amount that we pay to be a member, it's a really nice benefit to have their expertise. Also, they provide 4 computers to us every year as part of that cost, in addition to the integrated library system software, which we share with 30 other libraries. We move books among our libraries within a day or 2, and that's that delivery cost. We also share a subscription to Overdrive eBooks, our digital magazines. So there's a lot that they offer to us.
Okay. Questions on the capital request?
Just one more, in the deep freeze. The deep freeze then is something like when people put in some, say, personal information, right, you hit a button and it wipes everything out or it erases everything.
Yes.
Right, and it goes back to its, say, original setting.
Yes.
So the next person comes up and, right, they can put in their own personal information.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Other questions or comments from the board? Questions from RTM members or members of the public? Okay, you're all set. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is school-age childcare, page 62. Good evening.
Good evening.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good,
Good
thank you.
evening. Michelle Kremenaker, who is our director of our Family Resource Center, which has oversight of the school-age childcare portion of the Family Resource Center. She will be presenting this evening, as she has presented in the past.
Yes.
And that's under the jurisdiction of the Board of Ed, and that's why I'm Here, we work very closely together, so I turn it over to Michelle.
Thank you.
Emily.
There aren't a lot of changes in this budget. I think you will notice that one of the changes is I have a decrease in what I'm asking for my staff salaries. And this is due to the fact that currently the Walsh program, we have merged it with the elementary schools because Walsh is under construction, and I would normally have anywhere from 3 to 4 staff at that particular site. So since I don't have that site up and running at Walsh, it's been absorbed into the elementary schools, so I didn't need to have that additional staff. So that's why there's a decrease in that line item. And then I also added a line item for furniture. We need some new cabinets at our sites in the elementary school for security purposes to store the personal items of our students and their files. So I had requested $2,000 in that line item.
And so the total request is $609,550. It's actually a decrease of $55,700 over prior expenditures. And it's self-balancing through tuition for this fund. Question about fund balance. Is there a fund balance that you maintain?
There is a fund balance.
There is a fund balance that resides on the town side, not on the board side, and Mr. Finch, I would defer to Mr. Finch on the fund balance.
Mr. Finch?
Yes, as of June 30th, 2018, the fund balance was $570,850.
$850. Thank you. And the other question is, what's the population or the enrollment, I guess you'd call it, for this?
Do you mean the number or?
Yeah, the number of
Okay,
children.
so this year we have about 250 families who
Yep.
are enrolled in the before and after school program, and then the summer camp that we run at Murphy Elementary School during the summer.
Okay, thank you. Questions, Charlie?
Yeah, Michelle, on page 62.2, it shows, a reduction of 2 number of positions. Is that the 57,700 reduction? There's a reduction of 2 positions you show from
Is that on page 62 point, the budget book of the town?
the 62.2.
I thought you said 7. I'm sorry.
In other words, in 62.1, you showed 29. On 62.2, you showed 27. I just want to know whether that reduction is the 57,700.
Yeah.
And 27.
Well, it doesn't add up to 57. There's a difference between 273 and 267, so I'm not sure what that is, to be honest with you.
We're going to have to go back and check that, because I
Yeah.
didn't input that. Did you?
This one, it adds up automatically, yeah.
We're going to have to go back and check on that.
Okay, you can,
Sure.
so the 57, I guess we're trying to tie out the 57.7. That's essentially what we're trying to do.
There was a,
There was a, that would be on salaries, and Jim, you may be able to help us here. On the sheet, on section D expenditure justification form, and it was org code 517000. The system defaulted to $422,300. So the line should have read $415,541.
That's provided by Michelle, that was the file you sent.
right, but that's the, when you send the budget sheets, those formulas are already in it, so they all kind of talk to each other. So like that number there, the one we're referring to, I did not personally put in, it was when all the sheets were added up, they all talk to each other. So I don't know if there was something wrong with that particular formula in that cell.
We can reconcile it, I'm just, that's
Yeah.
one
Yeah, because there's
thing.
no formula in that page. I'll look at it, but there's
Oh,
no
okay.
formula in section D. It's a
That's-
blank page.
Okay,
Okay, so, but the request is your request.
that is correct.
Okay, so then we'll just, maybe just look at the backup
Yeah.
as to how it ties up. But we understand it's self-balancing account here, and you're saying that you're this is probably a temporary drop until you do the program at Walsh? That's so. Okay, so I think we understand there's some reconciliation that needs to occur, but we understand your request for $609,550. Other questions on this budget? Any, okay, questions from the RTM members of the public? No capital requests. That's all right, folks. It's okay. All right. So I think we're fine with your presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Next is adult education, page 61. Request for expenditures of $60,000. Again, a self-balancing fund paid through tuition. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you.
Yeah. This board will present the adult ed portion. I don't know if this body knows, but Mr. DeSalvo had resigned from that position.
Okay.
So, and that's not something that we would necessarily make a public announcement, but he did resign, and Christine is taking the leadership of that department. So she is presenting this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So our budget is remaining the same. We anticipate revenues of $60,000 again for next year. So our biggest parts of our budget come to salary and to purchase services. So we have an enrichment coordinator, and that's the $12,000 plus the employee benefits, the Medicare for that. All of our instructors in the enrichment program are independent contractors, so that's our purchase services line. And then we have the printing and postage and advertising of our classes, our catalog, our website, and that's $7,000. We have some office supplies. We have bank services fees, all the transactions for signing up for a class require transaction fees, and then we have membership conferences and meetings for a total of $60,000.
And your enrollment on this is approximately?
So our enrollment, so for this year, we have 178 classes that we've offered between September and then to complete in June. And we've had 1,084 Branford residents sign up for classes.
Okay. Thank you for that. Questions from Christine or Hamlet on this budget?
Question.
Harry? Sure.
And having heard the superintendent over the last year, we're getting an influx of non-speaking children in the school. Are you running any program at night for the parents?
Yes, we actually, adult education actually has two different sides to it. So this budget is for the enrichment classes. We also have a mandated side, and that is funded state and federal, and we offer English as a second language classes. We have classes during the day, and we have classes in the evening as well.
How do you encourage them to enroll? I mean, is the enrollment light in terms of
The enrollment's we have about 150 residents. So we're a regional program for our mandated side. So we are Branford, Guilford, North Branford, and Clinton. So we have about 150 total students in our English as a second language program. And that's up this year, probably about 15% from last year.
And one of the things that we do very, very well in Branford Public Schools is that we've actually offered classes through adult education at the high school during the day while the children are being educated in school. The parents are also learning to speak English during the day. So there is not an additional burden of daycare expenses for families that have just recently arrived. And that's really considered a model program. We do it in our Lower Media Center. And you had asked, how do we get that word out? There is clearly, through the schools and through our ELL teachers who have contact with the parents, they are encouraged and they're told about these types of programs. and people are taking advantage of them, which is great. And actually, our first selectman has been involved with that also. He typically goes to the classes, speaks, and holds babies and does all that good stuff. You know.
You're giving away his secrets. Okay, other questions on this budget? Questions from RTM members or members of the public? If not, thank you, Christine.
Thank you.
Take care. Good luck. Next is Board of Education presentation for their operating and capital budgets. Welcome, Michael and Donald.
Joe. Well, thank you, Joe, and the rest of the board for having us tonight. This is my sixth one that I've presented in front of you, and before I get started, I'm actually going to do this a little more off the cuff than actually read something and say something that's pretty much the bottom of my heart. And first of all, I want to thank you all for your support over the last several years and your relationship, your working relationship with Hamlet and his team. And one thing I'm proud of as the board chairman and as well as my board is we're coming in prior to the governor's proposal, coming in at our lowest rate that we've ever come in for an increase at 1.77. And I'm pretty proud of that. Basically, that's the work of our administration team, the teachers, and in fact the entire staff, because everybody is involved in that process. At the same time, we're coming in with that increased request is that we're coming in with our highest need students at an increase of approximately 40%. And that's pretty significant. So our population in our town is definitely changing. I'm sure all of you know that. And we're still able to move the district forward. Hamlet's going to briefly mention about our growth changes, and which is great to be able to do that and come in, I feel, within reasonable increases and still maintain our students to be able to keep moving them forward. One thing last night, and then I'll be quiet, is I encourage all of you, a lot of you want to know about test scores and where we're going, and our school district isn't always based on just test scores. It is important. It is important. It's one measurement, but we always want the kids to just continue to grow so that they can stand on their own when they graduate from our school system. And part of that was shown last night. We were doing a road show with our elementary students and going on our board meetings, going to each of the elementary school. We started with Tisco, we're going to Sliney, and then going to Murphy, and they're presenting what they're learning and so forth. And last night we had a chance to see during public comment one of our high school students who wasn't too happy with how something was being done that she was working on. So she stood on her own 2 feet with a lot of people there, younger children there, the TV going, and be able to express herself of what her concerns were and some miscommunication she was feeling, but then also said she could have done things a little bit different. That's real learning at that point in time, or that she has learned. And then we drop down to our 3rd and 4th graders getting up and speaking in front of a microphone, in front of a TV, expressing what they're learning and showing what they're doing in school. So that to me is important more than the grade. And because as you all remember, for public speaking and so forth, a lot of that wasn't done until you had to go do it in college or one of your last courses in high school. But our kids are learning this right from the start. And with our budget also, as you'll see, and Hamlet will go into it, is we're going to be putting in a new science curriculum for our elementary students, which is something that's going to be very important going down the road. So again, thank you for the couple of minutes, and I'll turn it over to Hamlin.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. I will get right into it, but I also want to just extend my gratitude to this board as well as to the cooperation and collaboration with the First Selectman's Office and Mr. Finch. What we have been able to do in the past few years is really to work closely in devising budgets that are fiscally responsive. And I believe that this budget, in the way that it was presented initially, the 1.77, and then subsequent to the governor's proposal, which added a 0.36 or $201,000 additional for the TRB, in the way that it's reflected in the budget book, and that it's a bifurcated budget essentially. We don't know if that will happen, but in the guidance letter that I had written back in November, I actually wrote to the administrative team, with the state's fiscal posture unpredictable, we can conclude that the fiscal frugality will be employed by appropriating bodies this budget cycle. That was part of the budget guidance to administrators. The administrators were asked if they were going to be recommending anything for their particular schools, that they would have to provide a sound rationale. What we have landed, and where we have landed, are three priorities, which I will get into, and that are reflected in the transmittal letter, and that is in the science program at the elementary level, the additional school psychologists so that we have equity amongst our three elementary schools as well as throughout the district to support the social and the emotional development of our students. We are seeing more and more students that have this level of support that is needed, either through IEPs, which is the special education, or they're not identified, but they are presenting issues that we need to support them in. This budget covers that, as well as a world language coach. The world language and the science, those have been long-term goals for the board and for the district for a period of time. And this year is very, very unique in that, although Mr. Kraus said that our budget is very, very low, we also have, this budget is really built on the fact that there's an opportunity, and that opportunity comes from the area of benefits. When you look at our benefit line, although the RX is significantly up, the reduction in the actual medical insurance piece of it, not the RX, is a savings of in excess of $1 million, and that nets out to slightly more than $300,000. That is a big driver in this budget. There's no ifs or buts about it that we would not be able to come in at 1.77 had we not had the good fortune of having the medical self-insurance be corrected after a few years of really astronomical increases. So I think that's important for this body to recognize, and we see this as an opportunity. Of course, when we start adding our salary line, total salaries, that's certified and non-certified, is up 4.2%. It's up just slightly over $1 million. But again, it's offset by other major drivers that I will go through that really net out to the point where it essentially gets us to the 1.77. Of course, we are asking for 2.13% because of the additional $200,000 that the governor has called for in his budget. If those dollars are appropriated and the governor is not successful, those dollars would not be needed by the board. I'm sure that and procedurally we would work that out, but those were not dollars that were part of the budget to educate our children or part of the targeted enhancements that we did this year. So I thank you for that, and I thank Jim and Jamie for their leadership with that, because we couldn't have done it without working closely. In the transmittal letter, I had written with Mr. Kraus 2 transmittal letters. As I want to reiterate that as we sit here today, and you've heard me say this, that we have 4 out of every 10 students in Branford is now considered a high-need student. Both but Mary T. Murphy and John B. Sliney School, the high-needs population is in excess of 50%. And that's pretty significant. And what you might be asking or thinking, what is a high-need student? A high-need student is either a student that is eligible for the federal lunch program, identified as special education, or identified as an English language learner, a student that is learning to speak English. We have some students that fall into more than one category, but they're only counted once for their percentage. It's just important to keep in mind that adds to the challenges that we have to face on a daily basis. In addition to that, we have 7.5% of our population is transient. And what I mean by that is they've either left school, left Branford Public Schools sometime after the first day of school, or they have entered Branford Public Schools at some point after the start of school. So we have a transient, we have almost 8% of our population is transient. Think of, many of you are in business, think about onboarding employees when you have that percentage of disruption. Again, it is a challenge for us, and it is a challenge that we meet on a regular basis. In addition, I think it's important also to note, this is a confirmed data point from the state website. We have 37 students that have chosen to leave Branford Public Schools to attend a private or private parochial school. We do have more and more students still exercising choice under the public school program. That means that they go to VOAG, VOED, magnet schools in New Haven, and we have students that go to New Haven schools, and New Haven students come to Branford schools. That is part of the public school system under a program called Open Choice. But I do want to dispel any notion that we have hundreds of students leaving to go to private schools. We have 37, and that's a data point that we can confirm with the state at the end of last year, how many kids, when they leave, there's a code that the state has given, and then if they should return, they get that code back. Once they're in private parochial, we do not track them. But that number is a lot lower than what I have been told, and so I thought it would be prudent, given the enrollment as you know, our enrollment is slightly declining. It's on pace, and it's on par with the enrollment study that was commissioned to do the intermediate school. That enrollment study was commissioned in 2016. We are under 3,000 students now, and we are projected to maintain anywhere between 2,800 to 2,850 students. That's the enrollment should be leveling off. That enrollment study, I would recommend that we repeat that I would recommend to my Board of Education that we repeat that the year after the intermediate school opens. I think it would be an important data point for us just to monitor. My experience is that when we open a new school, sometimes you get a little bit of a blip, and people may be either moving into town or interested in returning from other options, whether it's open choice or private and private parochial. Nonetheless, I think it's important to recognize that even though enrollment is down, just about 50 students, I believe, in your book it says 54 students, it's important to know that while enrollment is declining, the composition of the student body is increasing in need. And it's also important to keep in mind that while that is occurring, our growth rates as set by the state, we are making our growth rates, and let me give you just some numbers that your chairman had asked for, and I think are important to share with this body. The growth of all students in English language arts in 2016-17 school year, 55% of our students met their growth targets. Last year, 60.7% of our students met their growth target. That is an increase of 5.7% year over year. The number of students that met the growth target in math 2 years ago was 59.6. Last year, I should say in 16-17, it was 59.6. Last year in 17-18, it was 61.9. We also have, for high needs, because the state tracks that. Our high-need students, they grew 4 percentage points in the English language arts, but they declined by 2 percentage points in math. Our theory is that our new math program, it was our new year to implement that last year, so that we may have seen a little bit of a dip statistically. We are on pace. We either stay pace with the state or slightly above, and in some grade levels, we may be slightly below the state average by a grade level. But on balance, we're above the state average. Mr. Mooney had asked me about DIRGs, which are referenced about district reference groups. They're not necessarily used with this test, the Smarter Balance Assessment. What they do is they measure a child's growth over time. So they benchmark a child when they first start taking the test, and then they look at that cohort in the following year. And every year, the assessment gets a little bit more difficult. It's a real feather in the cap of the staff and in this community that we have the challenges that we have and that we're still making growth, albeit I don't think we should ever become satisfied or complacent with the growth rate, even though we may be making some growth or declines in some areas. We should always be very mindful of that. And it is one data point. It's a snapshot in time, the test. I bring that up because we also have, as I believe the director of East Shore Health said, the state and unfunded mandates. Public education has many unfunded mandates. And one of them is, first two really big ones. The state has never fully funded their excess costs at 100% for special education students, and they've never fully funded the educational cost sharing. Although we received about $190,000 more this year, we're projected to receive more for next year for ECS. All we need to do is look at what they potentially are going to put on as for a local board of a $201,000 for the TRB, which essentially doubles next year because it goes to $415,000 approximately. So that's, the state puts a tremendous amount of pressure on us, and they've also implemented the next generation science standards. Those science standards are outstanding, but they do not come with any funding from the state. Training, but no funding. They are, if we are to prepare our students for higher level science classes and to be competitive on a global stage, they can't wait to start their science instruction in the intermediate school. They need to start that early on. And Project Lead the Way is a project-based program that starts at the elementary level, where students are exploring science concepts at a very, very young age. That program will essentially be run by 4 teachers, and that's all they'll do is teach science to our elementary. And you may say, 4 teachers, 3 elementary schools. Natural question. Our distribution of population is not evenly dispersed in all 3 schools. So we have to look at that by the number of classes that we have and the number of sections that the teacher would be teaching. So we would be calling for 4 teachers. We hope to be able to reduce that by 1 if need be, just by compressing at a grade level, something that we have done. And compression essentially means if there's currently 4 third grade teachers, we would not be having 4 fourth grade teachers next year. We would increase class size slightly and have 1 less teacher, so that we would be moderating the impact budgetarily on the salary line. And speaking of salary line, because Mr. Imperato had many late nights with us negotiating the teacher contract, where we stand right now today is approximately around $800,000 less than what we had predicted where we would be when we advanced the salary schedule 2 years out in negotiations. Again, it's a snapshot in time, but it's important to keep in mind that we have reduced staff in previous years, so that's why we've been able to somewhat control the salary line for certified staff. But this year, we are purposely and deliberately, based on the science program and the school psychologist, adding to that because we see, again, this opportunity because of the medical self-insurance. You may recall that our budget last year was low because of what we did with special education and tuition, developing internal capacity so that we can educate kids, rightfully so, right here and not necessarily have to send them somewhere else outside of Branford with a very costly tuition. So these are all things that we continually work on. The piece that I would like to just bring to your attention, in addition to all the many good things that we're doing, purchase services you'll see in the board's book is up $462,000. That's a
page.
In the board book, it is. Sorry, Charlie. I should have wrote that in my notes. I think it's page 5, Ben? Yeah, page 5 of the board's book.
Yes.
You can see that number is up. Probably the biggest driver for us and purchase services is we have a few things going on there. One, the line itself was under budgeted in the previous year. We have around 200. I don't want to speak off the top of my head. I want to make sure I have that number correct. Page 16. Page 16. And what org is that? Yeah, under purchase services, the repair services is there, right?
That's one of the purchases.
Yeah. We have, with all the devices that we have in district, in which some of them are right now not leased, they're purchased and we have to maintain them. We had to essentially start planning, once we start to lease devices, what can we do, not only the devices, but also the infrastructure, and really start repairing things in-house as opposed to sending things out. We've developed capacity so that we can repair things internally. And as we bring more and more devices on board in the capital budget, you'll hear what this board tasked Mr. Finch and the Board of Education essentially to do is to come up with a sustainable plan for student devices. I think we've made some really good progress with that, and there's a plan, but we still have to do repair services for other things that we don't lease that are related to technology, and we would be doing that internally. Additional to that overall dollar amount, the turbine, there is a $57,000 that we pay to maintain the turbine at the high school, the trigeneration, as well as there is an air conditioning, I believe, Mr. Carbone, is it with Honeywell, the AC carrier? And that's to a tune of $69,000, and that's to maintain the temperature with that equipment. And we've used that extensively whenever there's an emergency, because the high school is a shelter. It's one of the shelters, and I know that Mr. Paluzzi enjoys the internet services of the shelter. That's a little bit of a joke from Mr. Finch, but it's. And moving on, sorry about that. Supplies, and I bring supplies up because supplies are down $153,000. And Charlie, you may ask me what page. So let me. I should have.
Well, same pages. No,
You
it's
can
page
see it.
5.
You can see it on that same page also. And on 16 is a really good summary. So although enrollment is declining and we may see some increases, but here's where you can see sometimes a decrease that is connected to enrollment. We may not need the same level of supplies, having less students. So you start to see some of that. But it's not one for one. When we have 54 less students, it's not 54 students in one class. And I bring that to this board's attention because at the beginning of this school year, we had to add a kindergarten. at JBS because we had a bubble of enrollment. That was something that was not budgeted for, that we had to absorb, and it's reflected in our head count now. So those things, that is, again, something that there's no way in the world that we can predict that. But with the supplies, knowing that we have less students, we can budget less in supplies. And we also have another big savings in the last object org or code, which is other, which is the food subsidy. Last year, we spoke about that quite extensively. A matter of fact, this time last year, there was folks that were rather vociferous about the food service contract, and that we were not being sensitive to their needs. What we did is we just negotiated in good faith, and we were able to negotiate with Mr. Neal's leadership at the table a contract that was essentially really limited any sort of exposure and risk to the board, i.e. meaning that the guaranteed return was increased, so therefore we would not need the subsidy. And we see that savings here now, which is something that's very, very positive. And also embedded in this budget is a 2.5% increase in transportation. We were able to successfully negotiate a successor agreement. A bid waiver was granted for that from the Selectmen's Group, the Board of Selectmen, as well as the Board of Education. And we have locked in at 2.5 for a few years, and then it goes up slightly. When our consultant was telling us that the rates were nearing 10%, and what was driving transportation increases was essentially labor costs, primarily health insurance, and trying to retain drivers and paying them a higher wage and providing them benefits. So then when we saw 2.5% being offered on the table as we were negotiating, we thought it was in our best interest to take that, because then we can plan, and as Mr. Finch often says, we can do the smoothing effect. We can plan. We know what our expenses are. So in a nutshell, the district is asking for 2.13% increase year over year. That translates into, I believe you have that, Mr. Mooney, but I will give it to you nonetheless, which is $1,206,667. That's inclusive of the TRB portion, which is $201,290. And when we pull out the TRB, our budget request is 1.77%, or $1,005,377. And that is the operating piece. Happy to entertain any questions.
Sure.
Or elaborate on any point that you would like me to.
Thank you. Questions from the board? Charlie, want to start?
Hamlet, you mentioned in the beginning about these students that you keep track of that go to private schools. Like, do you keep track of the homeschool kids?
Well, let me just clarify keeping track of. Well, no, it's important because what we do, Charlie, the only thing, what we have available to us, Charlie, is only when they disenroll. Because they are required to state a reason into the next school because we send records. So there's two things that, for homeschool students, we have homeschool students that may go out and then come back. We are not responsible for whatever happens in the homeschooling piece. So
no, I understand that, but I just wonder if you knew how many in general.
I don't have that off the top of my head, but I can get that for you, and I'm happy to send that.
Also, how many students do we have to send out to other areas, right, and pay that tuition?
Well, it varies.
We can't accommodate ourselves.
Yeah, well, it varies, Charlie. I mean, we have this, what's commonly referred to as the census, and we have students that have learning challenges and disabilities that, if at all possible, we would want to educate here. But we have some students, and I don't want to necessarily get into disability, so I do not want to identify any student. But the range is very, very broad. It's very, very broad. And it's not only cognitive, it could be physical disabilities that students have that, frankly, we don't have the capacity to educate them. But whenever we can, we educate here.
No, I get that, but I mean, do we have a number, like
roughly,
a dozen kids that we can't
No,
count?
no, it's, that number varies. I want to say it's somewhere probably in the 50s. And, that's what we have.
That's a bigger number than I thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, other questions?
I got another one.
Sure, go ahead.
You know, with 54 less students.
Yep.
And yet, we're adding 6.6 more certified teachers, 1.7 more non-certified aides. So we're getting like 8.5 more teaching people, and yet we have a drop in enrollment. Now, are they primarily for new science classes?
Four of them are new for science. So that's on the certified staff. And as I'd mentioned, our intention is to actually make it 3 new people based on that compression that I hope I explained and I was able to articulate. The other addition is a 1.6 school psychologist, because right now we have part-time psychologists in our two of the 3 elementary schools. And as you can tell, that our needs are increasing, so we're bringing those folks up to full-time, and then we also need an additional school psychologist. Those are actual positions. The other ones is also an accounting piece where we have our instructional coaches that, and FTEs are funny because FTEs, and Mr. Neal, who lives in this world every day, there's a portion of, some of our coaches actually teach classes, so they count as part of the teaching staff for FTE purposes. And then we count them, their coaching piece is for coaching, so that we have an accurate accounting. I think your question is a legitimate one, Charlie. I think, for most people, when they see declining enrollment and they see that we're adding staff, they would say, okay, what are they doing? And why are they doing that? Well, new programs, science, additional social and emotional supports, 1.6 for our school psychologists, and then our world language coach. These are programmatic enhancements. We worked and these are not administrative positions whatsoever, and these are positions that are actually, most of them, 5.6 of them are working directly with students. And we said, and I said publicly in previous years, we will compress, but there will come a time when we wish to implement a program because science was on the horizon, and we need to be thoughtful about the way that we do that. I do believe that in future years, if we see enrollment decline, just as you've seen the board and myself make reductions in headcount. You've seen that. We've done that 2 years ago. We cut an intermediate school team. 1 year before, the year before that, we cut teachers at the elementary level. Last year, we reduced teachers. But the staffing is just not I've said this before, it's not a long division problem. We just can't take the head count and divide it by teachers. We need to have different types of teachers and different types of certified staff. And that's what you see here tonight.
This new science program, is that a recommendation from the state board, or is it encouraging you or towns and municipalities to adopt this new program, or?
Well, it's not a recommendation from the state board. The next generation science standards do come from the state board, and we have to implement those, and students will soon become tested on those. They give local control to how you address those programmatically. The Project Lead the Way program is both a curriculum and a program at the elementary level. So that's one of the efficiencies of having Project Lead the Way. There are some municipalities, local municipalities that have science instruction. at the elementary level. And it is, clearly, it is something that, it's an investment. It's something that the board, and I've recommended to the administration, and the board sees the value in that, and we would hope that you see the value in that, and that we're able to sustain that. Anytime that we have teachers retire, and we have 2 retirements, we are usually in a very good position to either, one, not fill that, or to fill it with someone that is not as experienced as the teacher who retired. So there's a savings there. So that's why we feel confident that we can sustain this and still control the salary line.
Thank you.
Okay, Victor, you had a question?
I was referring to special needs children. Are there other districts that send their children to Branford where they can't accommodate them locally?
No, Victor. It's, what we do have, there is, and again, I don't want to, because there's so few students, I don't want to necessarily identify anybody, but in our very, we have a program that starts at a very, very young age, and these are for children that are identified, that essentially from birth to 3. And if they're identified, it is incumbent upon the school district to provide services for them. And sometimes there may be an occasion where we may take a student from a neighboring municipality for a typical student or a student that, but it's very, very rare. Very, very rare.
Thank you.
Other questions from the board?
Yeah.
Harry?
Could you review the administrative personnel, how many we have in FTEs and the
I did not, Harry.
the middle school?
I can do it off of, actually, that's,
We have 6
On page 6, and also, you're talking about the middle school?
Well, the grammar schools, the middle schools.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
some of it shows on page 20, but you'd have to kind of look at it. They've got the certified and...
well, I could do it off the top of my head, Harry. Harry, I could do it off the top of my head. The high school, we have one building principal. We have 2 assistants, and we have a dean of students. That's in the administrative contract plan. At the intermediate school, we have 1 principal and 2 assistant principals. Each elementary school has 1 principal. Right now, we have 1 principal who is an interim principal, and we will be hiring for a new principal at JVS school. We have 1 administrator that's in charge of pupil services, that's special education, student services. And we also have a coordinator for related services that reports directly to that individual, who is Mr. Ciccarelli. He's not here today. That's the program that I was talking to you, Victor, about related services, and that program starts birth to 3. So we have students in that. We also have a Director of Technology, Mrs. Mingrone, who's behind me this evening. She is also part of the administrative ranks. We did have an administrator for adult education, but we've changed that model when Mr. DeZalvo resigned, and we're looking to go forward with a model that does not have an administrator. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, on page 6 of our budget, you have operations, there's some couple new positions on the non-certified, classified position. Could you just hit the highlights on those increases?
Sure. Actually, I'm going to let Mr. Neal talk about that, because in talent services and what Mr. Neal has oversight of, in one of those positions, it was actually a reorganization in his department. So I'll let Mr. Neal talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Excuse me. We kind of discovered the hard way that we were not staffed sufficiently in the payroll department. We had a key person leave, and we recognized that we really needed some cross-training and some more depth to the department. So we added a supervisor to that department. So now we have a payroll department of 2. Works much better. We're more responsive to
to staff, and even more importantly, if someone is incapacitated or leaves or something like that, we can keep things going without a hiccup. I'm sorry, the other, I'm not sure where you were.
I was looking at page 6.
Page 6?
Yeah.
It says operations and
Yeah, we added the security guards.
custodial.
It's this one. Yeah, you got it.
Okay. Yeah, the security guards, so the custodian, we, known that the building project was going on at Walsh this year, we reduced a custodial position, just because we knew that we didn't have as much space to clean. This is a restoration of the previous level, so you can look back to 17, 18. We were at 35. We took a year hiatus to save some money and didn't fill a custodial position, and now we're back. That's so that'd be at the intermediate school. Of course, with our, with the tremendous investment the town has made in Walsh, we want to make sure that we maintain it appropriately.
And security is up by 1.5?
Yes, and and that's not something that we have discussed this evening, but we have made some significant enhancements to security. Obviously, I'm not going to speak to them in great detail, but from a personnel standpoint, we've added security guards at the intermediate school. We've expanded that. We only had one, and we have some significant activity after school, and one was, frankly, was just not enough. And we also have more and more activity in adult ed areas, you said, at the high school. And so that we needed to add an additional security guard at the high school, because our high school from 7 o'clock in the morning until around 9 o'clock at night, it's a buzz of there's a lot of activity there. There's a lot of activity. As we speak tonight, it's the second night of the play. So and we have folks there this evening.
Okay. Other questions on the operating presentation, operating budget for the board? Questions from RTM members, members of the public? Peter? Peter, if you can come up and use a mic.
Two Peters there.
Peter Jackson and then Peter Black.
Hi.
Hi, Pete.
I have a question. In the budget presentation that the superintendent gave in February, much was made of the percentage of students eligible for free and reduced lunches. And it's not a direct budget kind of question, but in 2014, the number was 25%, 15, 26%, 17, 27%, 17, 18, 26%, 2018, 19, 35%, and tonight I just heard 40%. And I'm wondering, I live in this town, I didn't see this quantum change in the population of the town in this 1 year. It's a curiosity thing.
Sure. And it's a simple answer. Peter, what has happened started last year, actually. The state of Connecticut directly certified families that were receiving assistance from the state, any form of assistance from the state, and it was called a direct certification. And I believe I've said to this body previously, I know certainly to the board, that I always thought that the percentage of free and reduced was an underrepresentation based on what we were seeing in the school. I think I've actually said that to Charlie in some of our meetings in previous years. So when we saw that bump last year, and then we continue to see that some of that is directly certified, so we get that from the state. And that's the explanation for that.
That's the State Department of Ed or DSS or?
That I don't know.
The data originates from DSS.
Okay.
Then these kids become eligible for free lunch.
Gotcha.
So, and we get state grants for that.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Peter?
Yeah, it does. I would just much prefer it if instead of showing us this, you were telling us about how many merit scholars we had instead.
Well, actually, Peter, I know that you and I always have this conversation.
I know we do.
and I'm happy to continue it, but...
It's a frustration for me and for you, I guess.
It is, but I do believe that we do a fine job. Just 2 years ago, we had 3 students appointed to service academies. We send many students to top-tier schools. We have students that go on. One of the captain of the hockey team that just won the state championship just announced that he's doing a post-grad year, then he's going to the Air Force Academy. So we have students that are doing many, many good things.
Well,
You know.
I'm glad to hear that.
All right.
Seriously.
No, I know that. I know that.
Thank you, Peter. Another question, Peter Black.
Thank you. Makes life easier if we all have the same name. Just to follow up on the high needs thing, that category is not exclusively school free lunch.
That is correct. It's comprised
also
of
special needs.
It's
or
comprised
something.
of three groups.
Yeah, so
That's correct.
And you're saying that the free or reduced price lunch has gone up in part due to administratively making it easier, that we aren't necessarily having a massive change in population, but it's, I'm not saying it's not changing, but it hasn't.
Yeah, I don't want to sound the alarm bells. I mean, it's just people that become eligible for services based on criteria that's set by the state that in the past they may have had to make application.
Right.
They no longer need to make application. They are just directly certified.
by the state, regardless of any type of application
Right.
process.
Yeah.
So in many cases, many of them would have always been there, they just.
Right, it's not,
Getting
you're not necessarily saying there's an influx, you're saying that the
No,
classification
I never said that.
has changed.
I
Saying that the classification has
Yeah,
changed.
that's, I've never said that, but it's still a need. It's clearly a need.
The open choice program, how many, that's available on kind of if the seats are open?
That's correct.
So what's our population for that?
Peter, don't quote me on this, but I think our
I
number
mean,
is,
ballpark.
I believe our number this year is 36.
Okay, so
No,
relatively.
it's probably give or take 1 or 2 students. And what I'm most proud about is that when our students do participate in open choice, they stay with us.
And the other question I have, I noticed in your class sizes for the elementary were kind of around 18, sometimes 16, 18. And the first time I started noticing class sizes, before you got here, Catherine Halligan, we were 23, 24. So I wonder if you'd comment on I guess it's a deliberate decision to decrease class sizes.
Absolutely. It's, in my presentation and working with the board, maintaining class size to a reasonable level, which is at the elementary level in the high teens, is preferable when you think about the composition of the student body, as well as the way that instruction is being delivered with the workshop model, a lot of centers, a lot of activities. And so we made a conscious decision to support our teachers and to support the learning by controlling class size. And I've said here publicly, the debate on class size, there's 2 sides of that argument. Some people believe class size has no impact. Others believe that it has all the impact in the world. I believe somewhere in the middle, particularly when you think about the composition of your class. And that's where we are with that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Peter. Other questions from the public or RTM members? Dennis?
I know we brought this up last year and probably the previous year too, and I was questioning, is there any consideration given to some of these teachers that are on the maximum level as sort of a golden handshake and hiring entry-level teachers at considerably less amount of money? Is that, has the board looked at that?
It's, I will tell you, Dennis, that we have one board member who has asked about that. I don't, during my tenure, the board has not offered any sort of Ohio plan or early retirement. Mr. Neal and I have talked on a very preliminary level, the notion of potentially doing something instead of years of service, which is the Ohio plan, to look at potentially something for medical. Historically, what happens is that teachers may delay or defer their retirement until they're age 65, even though they may have maxed out for years of service, and they do that for medical reasons. I think it would require collaboration with the town, very close collaboration, to do something like that. I think, certainly I can't speak for the board, but administratively, I would be very open to that. We currently have, I believe it's, we have 14 steps. I want to say that we have 151 teachers at that top step. And don't want to say a number without really confirming it. It's not something that I look at every day, but when I did look at it, it does make an impression on me. So, to your point, you know, just let me get that. Dennis, you stopped me, so let me get this for you. I don't want to hold up the presentation. I can certainly, here it is. No, it's 151.
151.
Yeah, what I said, 151.
You said 151?
Yeah,
You're around it.
151 top step.
Yeah, I don't know what the current model would be, but in the past, I don't think there's been a lot of savings necessarily for the town. It's actually been maybe more expensive at times for early retirement type of packages.
Especially the Ohio plan, Joe.
Right,
Especially
right,
now
so-
that it's 8.25%, because teachers are contributing an additional percent.
Right.
And,
So it may be good for programmatic purposes, but not necessarily for fiscal purposes. Charlie?
If I look on page 6, are the total teachers about 270, and you're saying 151 are already at the top step?
That is correct.
That's what he said.
I think it shows 268.6, so it said 270. And 150 are at the top step?
151 are in step 14.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's a big percentage.
Well,
It's longevity in the position.
It doesn't, if you think about just someone who is out of school at 22, they're a top step at age 36. If they, that's not that uncommon. Even if somebody comes into the profession late and starts at 30, 14 years later, they're a top step, they're 44, and they're still looking at 21 years before they hit 65. So it's I think it's a discussion that probably, well, I know it's being had at really high levels. And superintendents and commissioner of education looking at, how to stabilize that a little bit, and maybe looking at some different models. But if I were to comment on that, it would be just Hamlet's opinion.
To me, it's a love of the profession and the love of Brantford.
Mhm.
Thanks, Charlie. Other questions from anyone here in the room? If not, thank you for the operating presentation. We'll move on to the capital.
Thank you. What I'd like to do is, Mr. Neal, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Neal, but there's a few things that I just want to highlight before Don talks and answers any questions around the capital. The capital budget, first and foremost, the board took action 2 weeks ago in redesignating dollars from the WIS locker rooms and showers. There was an appropriation in excess of $40,000. There was some residuals in approximately of $36,000. They essentially redesignated those dollars and made a recommendation through board action that those dollars be purely a recommendation that those dollars be applied to the lease. And then also the board took action and acknowledged and affirmed that nobody else in the administrative ranks was eligible for the XG funds. Again, working very closely with Mr. Finch, the board took action on that, trying to essentially put together existing dollars without asking for new dollars for things that we are trying to do in the capital budget. Two big highlights you'll see in the capital budget is the remake of the high school foyer. The WIS project is progressing very, very smoothly. However, once that school is done, we will have a state-of-the-art school from a security perspective. The main entrance, we do not have that at the high school. Our high school has a double set of doors, and then once you get in through those double set of doors, you pretty much have access to the whole school. So we look to at least have some designs from an architect, as well as it was professionally estimated through Fusco. So it was not a number that was just, that we just tried to, take a stab at. It was, the design was professionally estimated so that we would have a good idea, a very good idea of what it would cost to essentially almost replicate the foyer at the high school to the foyer that we will be having in the new intermediate school. Very high traffic area. From a security perspective, I think it's a very important thing that we invest in. In addition, I think we also need to start looking at the JBS from a long-term perspective. The building is beautiful, it grows on me every day, but it was built for a high school, and it's now occupied by very small people, and we probably need to do something. And then lastly, what Mr. Finch had spoken to me about today via email, just the notion of air conditioning at the elementary levels from an air quality control, and knowing that the issue of, we have two schools that are identical, so we probably can gain some efficiencies by bundling that all at the same time. But we also don't want to necessarily do something for two schools and leave one school out. So I think we need to have some conversations about that. So with that, I turn it over to Don.
Thanks.
Sure. I'd like to address first number 2 and number 3 in system-wide, the lease authorization for the teacher laptops and the student devices. The teacher laptops, we're on a 3-year lease. We have to send them back this summer, so we need to renew them with a fresh lease. Both these figures are based on actual quotes that we have in hand from computer leasing companies. Number 3, I would really like to express our extraordinary gratitude to Mr. Finch for helping us initiate what we hope will be a sustainable plan for student devices. We've, as in the past, we've bought computers, for the kids when we need to, but ultimately that creates kind of bumps in our requests. This is kind of a more of a smoothing type of approach, where Mr. Finch has accumulated funds from a variety of sources, including our own operating budget, and the request for next year is that'll cover 4 grades, then the following year 4 more grades, and then 3 grades in the 2021-22 time period. Any questions about that?
I'm following you on page C1.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, sorry.
C1, yes.
Yes,
And then
sorry about that,
the
Charlie.
other detail prior to that. You can go ahead, Don.
Chromebooks is generally what we use for the older students. There's another line, it doesn't hit until 21-22, but I wanted to point it out. The littler kids need touch devices, so we use iPads for them. So that would be a separate lease. The office admin computers is something that we've had every year, just to replace aging equipment and laptops and that sort of thing. A lot of people have been complaining lately that their laptops are large and heavy. 10 years ago they wouldn't have been considered so, but now they're kind of unwieldy. Facilities equipment, again, is an annual request that we have for vacuum cleaners, grounds equipment that wears out, floor scrubbers, those sorts of things. The superintendent talked about the entrance security upgrade for the high school. It will basically take the same footprint that we currently have, but expand it greatly and utilize a kind of a term of art that they call as a man trap, where someone gets in the first door and then they're held there until staff can get their identification and make sure that it's appropriate to let them into the rest of the building. As he said, we've had a professional design done on this, and we've also had a professional cost estimate. The architectural study was already mentioned for Slaney School. Indian Neck, same situation. We used the same, Fusco did the cost estimate on that, and Antonazzi, also the architects from the intermediate school, did the design there. People can't. There's a lot of parents coming and going and dropping off and picking up their kids. They can't just get in. We have a buzzer to get them in, but we really don't have any kind of contemporary foyer system that we'd like to have. Moving on to page C2, the boiler replacements, as we sometimes do on the larger capital expenditures, we accumulate money over successive years, and so it's sort of like a sinking fund, and we will need to do boiler replacements at Slaney, Indian Neck, and the high school. These were not included in the recent Honeywell energy management and conservation upgrade that was done.
Don, why didn't we not include those?
Mr. Finch?
Joe?
I can't speak specifically to that element, but I can sort of conceptually describe the way the Honeywell project worked is, they looked at the energy usage of our various facilities. And in doing that, they identified roughly 12 what they call energy conservation measures. And, there were certain things that had higher payback and certain things that had lower payback. And so once you identify the high payback projects, what were the next priorities? And so even on the town side, not everything was done with that. The idea is to come up with a project of a certain size that basically pays itself back within a certain number of years. And so there's always going to be things that are left out of it because there wasn't enough savings to support that. It was all based on a financing. So in other words, if I can, let's just use a round number, if I could save $200,000, what does $200,000 support in terms of a loan to do a certain basket of projects? And so they prioritized projects, and then they had to get it down to the amount that the loan would actually support. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So that's kind of how they backed into it. So, and doing that, they couldn't do, 20 energy conservation measures. They were only able to do about a dozen. And so this one would have been basically, wouldn't have made the cut. Alex the other night was talking about, I think it was the lights at Vets, I believe. And again, that park didn't have a high energy usage. So that wouldn't have made the cut. So they look at what some of the high energy uses are. So it's relative to other projects. You're competing against the other projects, I guess.
Thank you.
Okay.
Joe, can we back up a question on the Slaney School, the architectural study?
Yep.
It's a broad decision, renovations. Are you dealing with safety, environmental, structural?
Yeah, area, we would be looking at safety. There are some environmental considerations in that school. It's an older building. The classroom design itself, and we probably would have to look at the ladder wells, or it's stairs, because the way that they were designed for high school students. And it is a building it's a beautiful building, but it does not necessarily support the educational programming in the way that it should in elementary school. It was not designed as an elementary school when it was built, and it certainly doesn't represent an elementary school now in 2019. So it would be pretty encompassing.
Would it be better in transferring those students to existing schools?
We don't have that capacity, and I think that's one of the things here that we have done prior to the intermediate school project, and this board actually years ago, was to reduce our footprint. We gave back Pine Orchard School We've rededicated Branford Hills. And certainly when we move out of 1111 and go into central office, that building also will be rededicated. That's the term given back from the board through official action back to the town. It reverts back. We don't have a school where we can send those students out. Murphy School is our largest population, and JBS is our second largest population of elementary. And I think it's a beautiful school. That's just my opinion. It's grown on me. At one time, I was, my thinking has changed around that school. It's particularly with the senior center and the rec center adjacent. I know our first selectman has, expressed some, just in conversation relative to campus almost. I'm very supportive of having the school embedded in that section of town. I think it's ideal. But we may have to address population in the near future relative to bus routes. That's just something so that we stay balanced with our students.
Charlie, you got another question?
Don, on page C2, under system-wide, it shows asbestos abatement, and that it shows it in different years. Now, when I read system-wide, I think all the schools are going to be done for 8,000. Apparently not.
So we only have asbestos in 2 of our schools now. There's a little bit in the high school, but then Sliney has some significant amounts. So anytime we have to do a penetration in a wall at Sliney, generally there's going to be an abatement part of that. So we don't exactly know what's going to be, at the time we put our plans together, we don't know exactly when abatement and specifically what's going to be needed. But this is actually a continuation of a provision that we're currently working off a previous capital allocation for this. So every few years we put some money out there that we don't know specifically, but it's a provision that
Should
we
you
know we're
find
going
it,
to
then you
tap into
fix
yet.
it.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, anything else on this, Don, that you need to?
I'd be happy to go through the individual lines, continue that if you'd like.
Sure.
The door replacement, so we intend to begin a systematic replacement of doors that are either aging or in some cases, we have doors that are actually still wood and, exterior doors that for security purposes we want to have metal. This provision will allow us to replace the 10 or 12 worst of them every year. Roofing repairs, again, that is an annual provision that we have for kind of normal wear and tear that happens on our roofs. Hamlet talked about the air conditioning system for the elementaries, which that we, in all likelihood, I think that's a candidate for a bonding project. Security cameras, we made a significant investment in the last couple of years in security cameras. Again, they age and they break, and so our anticipation here is some of these will be replaced, and some we may actually expand our system to cover some areas that aren't currently being surveilled. Moving down to Tisco, Tisco and Murphy are sister schools. They're almost identical, except Murphy does have a side parking lot for staff. We would want to put one in at Tisco because we don't have sufficient parking for staff there right now. And then the final on page C3, allocation for various code compliance. Sometimes, occasionally officials come in to visit us. It could be the fire department, our elevator inspectors, folks who inspect the boilers. And again, this is just a provision for keeping us in compliance with the laws. When they come in, they find it's deficient, we need to fix it right away.
Thank you, Don. Questions on this? Charlie?
Hey, Don, just going back to C2, just curious, on the door replacement, are those fire doors? Or are they just your regular classroom doors?
It could be either, the more expensive ones.
Fire doors are expensive.
Fire doors are very expensive, yeah, they are.
Oh, okay, I didn't know whether they were all fire doors, they're gonna, it's not gonna cover it.
Yeah, no, but, yeah, a set of fire doors can run $5,000 easy.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Other questions on the capital? Harry? You're good? Gentlemen? Questions from the RTM members, members of the public? Frank, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question on page 44, you say that, this is a capital item, you say student devices, 4-year total cost is $328, yet on page C1, it looks like it's about $902 over the 4 years. The totals are $328, and $246.
Sure, so, that's just one link, so that's the, I talked about the sustainability plan that Mr. Finch worked and supported myself and Ms. Mingrone. What you see in the capital plan is actually 3 successive leases, so the, of a 4-year term. So that the 328 will be actually paid over a 4-year term. Then the next year, there's another 328, which will also be paid over a 4-year term, and so on and so forth. Am I?
I still don't understand. I mean, my question is, Mr. Neal, is it true the 4-year total cost is $328?
Only for the
For the first group?
The first group, yeah.
For the first group.
So you're putting the full amount in,
Right.
even though you're paying it over a 4-year period?
Yeah,
They're tiered.
Right, but because it's a lease and it's capital lease, then it needs the full approval in that fiscal year. And then it gets rolled out over 4 years, and then the next year, there's a layer that goes on top of that for another 4 years and another 4 years. But because they're leases, they need to be capitalized, at least in the initial year of approval.
Right, because we
And
can't sign
sign
the
it.
contract otherwise.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, it's not deceptive, but it's actually not going to cost you $328,000 for that line item next year. It's going to cost you a fourth of that. And then the next year is going to be, if we approve the 328 next year, then a fourth of that is built into their budget.
Right.
So that's how they get paid for it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, I wanted to ask about the entrances, to the other 3 schools. It's great to hear that, the plans for Walsh, the plans for BHS, and also the plans for the other school, right? But what's the story with, Tisco?
Sure. First of all, the traffic that we receive at the elementary schools is different type of traffic than we receive at the intermediate and high school. All 3 elementary schools do have a man trap double entry that was done shortly after the unfortunate and tragic events in Newtown. So there is that man trap piece, and we've also done some other additional things for security. And the next one that we would be looking at, and you see reflected here, is Indian Neck School, because that is a school where we have the students that I was speaking to Victor about, some of our most fragile students. Again, it's got a fair amount of traffic, but it's pretty wide open. It does have a buzz system, but we would like to reconfigure that area.
All right, okay. Thank you, Hamlet.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. Other questions on the capital budget, Peter?
Not really a question, but a comment. I do remember when you turned back the Bradford Hills School, you did say you didn't want to take it off the table for a future site for a Sliney replacement, and, I'll follow up later on your comprehensive thoughts on Sliney's future. I know we've allotted some money for Sliney renovations in our long-term capital plan as well, but, the idea was digest the middle school first and then think about Sliney.
Yeah, and absolutely, I think as time passes, conditions change, so I think we're in a good place.
Okay, other questions or comments on the, Dennis, you have a question in regards to the capital budget?
Yeah, this is just a comment to Mr. McNeil and Joe Carbone. When we get into the security aspect of it, which I'm highly in favor of, consider Assa Abloy. They have a door division, and they are the Cadillac of the industry here. So you have the support staff there, and it's a local company.
Thank you for that,
It's my alma mater.
thank you for that unsolicited plug. Any other questions or comments?
And drink Ovaltine, right?
All right, other questions or comments from the board or to the board?
Yeah, actually, I do it.
Jim, you have something to say?
Yeah, as it relates to the technology plan, you're going to be receiving a letter probably tomorrow, basically supporting this redesignation that Hamlet referred to, and then we could sort of outline sort of the basis of the technology plan. I think, based on Frank's questions, some of the others, I think, Joe, you hit it on the head. We're authorizing an amount.
Right,
This is the amount we signed a contract for, and then we budget the cash flow each year, so.
Correct, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, thank you, Board of Ed.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you, members. Thank you.
And so we will have a vote to close the public hearings for fiscal 2019, 2020.
Motion to close.
Motion to close, seconded by Harry. All in favor? Aye. Thank you.
This program was brought to you in part through the support of the Town of Brantford. Watch town meetings and other videos on demand at BrantfordTV.org.